thank you for joining me in my studio here today as I start another painting. Now this particular painting is of a beautiful autumn scene up on Cedar Mountain in Utah. Now that's a place that I love to go to in the autumn when the aspens are in their bright yellows and golds and the dark of the evergreens that silhouettes those nicely against the sun. But it's especially nice when there's a little creek running through it. And so today I'm doing a painting of Coal Creek, which runs down through those aspens and tumbles over these white and gray and red rocks as it works its way down the mountain into the valley below. But this one's going to be a very interesting painting, so stick with me as I work on this new painting called Coal Creek. So I've got my yellow ochre and my reds up in here. I'm going to tip this up and notice how these pigments are mingling. They're bleeding down together. At the same time that's happening, as it begins to dry down a little bit, I'm going to grab just some blue, and I'm going to take this ultramarine blue now, this side of this as it comes down, and I'm going to let this bleed and work its way down also in kind of a random fashion. It's going to just kind of tell us that there's something going on in the sky, but nothing particularly dramatic or dynamic in it. It's just going to work its way down in a very loose way and fall into this scene as it works its way down. Instead of working and working and working that, I'm just going to go ahead and let that all bleed down, and that's going to be my sky. So in just 2 or 3 minutes, we have our sky in there. This is artist's tape that's going around the edge here, and it wipes off very easily. Okay, we'll let that die down, and while it's doing that, I'm going to bring a lot of these really bright yellows that we see down in here in this area. I think I'm going to need to bring this closer so you can see, but some of these yellows up behind, I'm going to go ahead and bring those in right now, and they'll just mingle into the sky area. And I'm using, again, a little bit of this New Gamboge, which is very, very strong. This will dry lighter than this. I'm not worried about tracing the edges because I'm going to do all of the hard edges with the darks later. But I do want this variety of yellows and greens to come through here. So I'm just going to start with the yellow and bring it down through here. And where I know we're going to have those very, very light yellows, which is down in this area where this comes up into there, I'm going to make it very, very light. And I'm working my way down quickly. We'll bring our darks down into this. Trace the edge of that. And I'm going to continue that past where this tree's going to be up here in this portion. And come back up above here. A little bit of yellow. If it bleeds into the sky, that's not a problem. And go down here and work into this as well. Okay. And I'm going to have some kind of stronger yellows in here, so I'll go ahead and work that in. I'm going to keep a crisp edge right here, the edge of these rocks. And right here as well. Gone a little too far. And then I'll just bring some very, very light. It's going to be a warm scene, so I'm going to bring some very, very light lights all the way down through here where the bushes are going to be, and just kind of get a tone through that. Again, using mostly yellow ochre, a little bit of gamboge. I'm going to stay away from these rocks for now. Just kind of bring these lights back. I'm going to have so much darks in there, I don't have to worry about any of these edges. Just going to have this come up and come through using this big wide brush to just kind of scumble the edges. That means leave a little texture showing as I work my way down around there. Okay, now so I've got my sky going, I've got some of the yellows going down into here. And so I'm going to let that dry down a little bit and start to work into this area. Okay, now reposition this a little bit so you could see better. I'm going to come up in here now and make a few of my darker darks. I'm just using this big sable brush. And again, I'm rough on the edges. I want to see some hard edges and some soft edges, but we're way back in the distance now, so we don't need to see a lot of hard. We just want to see that value change as we work back. Down in this area, I'm going to be a little bit careful, utilizing a nice point here, and leave a few hard edges where the edges of those aspens come down. I'm just using a little bit of quinacridone gold and touching that into this area a little bit and working my way down into here. And then I'll bring some greens down in here where we're going to come right up against this edge, let that come back behind this tree. And when people see how I begin a painting, they just are so, they just think, wow, it's just so rough and so bold about this. And I'm like, yeah, that's true. But it's because all the refinement is done later. All of the edges that we need really come up later. Now we need to build texture and our basic colors back up behind here. We want to leave the areas that are going to be light. We want to kind of control ourselves with that. But we want to get some color in there. We're going to have a painting that's not going to really have all that much white in it. So we want to be kind of cautious about leaving some of those white areas. Yes, that's true. But let's go ahead and get the darks in here. Let's kind of break our way down into this and get something going so that we can not have just not be judging this color against pure white, because it's not going to be that way as we move along. So I'm going to have to soften up some of these edges here and keep my tones going. So I get some of these lighter greens back in here, and I'll keep working the darks over the top of that as we go. Grabbing a little bit of phthalo here, but it's a little early for that strong of a green, but I'm kind of making a duller green out of it by allowing some pigments to mingle down into here. We'll see some of the detail from that as we see a few of these edges come up around this rock right up here. But what we want to see is some mingling of color. Okay, so now we're dropping in some reds, which is turning some of these bright greens into more of a brown, something that's darker. A little touch of phthalo into that makes it darker, but we still sense the green, but it's a more earthy green. So that's how we're going to get all these darks down into here, is by utilizing some of those together. And we're going to get quite dark back in here. So I don't mind getting started and bringing some of these darks down into here right away, right from the start, and move into that arena of darkness. Okay, here we go. And I'll show some greens down in there, but you know what? It's off in the distance. Be careful to leave some places. They won't be white, but I want to preserve some areas where there's some detail back in there. And so I'm just watching these edges as I go. And then I'll bring some of these darks down through this area right here. Go ahead and darken this up. It's going to be quite dark in there. Quite dark over here. So I'll get some of that going right down through this bush. And now I'm going to bring some reds into that and let that mingle on its own. Bring some yellow ochre, let that mingle into it. So what I end up with is I have those darks, but I also allow for variety of not just color, but also values down in here. But it's all going to be in a dark range, so I can get that in there right now. And I'll come up and refine all of this later. That's the fun part, when we get to see how that all shapes up. But in the meantime, these darks are going to pull down into this area and trim off where that rock is and allow some space for some other rocks, which will be quite dark, but I'm going to leave an edge there for now and get this going across here. Let's bring some reds down into here. In fact, let's get some magenta, drop down into here, and that warmth will come through even later. Paint, it's still dark, but we don't want it to be just dark green. We want it to have some warmth back in there because we'll have reflected light. So now I'm going to go ahead and leave a few edges right here where this tree comes down. Come back, grab some of my greens, and come into this area. And I'm going to just leave some random edges back in there, and I'll bring some tones into it. But right up here, where this bush comes up around there, while we're here, I'm going to go ahead and tighten those edges up right now. And I'll actually show some very small leaf shapes back up in here. Now this brush that I'm using is allowing me to do some smaller shapes because it has a nice point on it. Now not all of your brushes are going to have that nice shape. You might need to turn to a smaller brush at this point. But this allows me to do that, so I'm going to go ahead and work in here and get some shapes right up on the edge. And we're also going to have some branches that comes up through there. So I'll leave a few negative branches as well by painting the darks and preserving the lights. Okay. All right, so now we have a lot of variety in here. I'm going to go ahead and pull some of this down just a little and let these edges fan out slightly. Touch a little bit of water into there. Let some of these inside edges fan out. Let this blend down. Get some variety in here. Some lights and some darks. It's way back in there. It's going to be dark, but I want to see some of that detail. So I'm going to do that right now. Leave a branch or two. Okay, I'm going to just let that color bleed for now, and I'll work on this later in this area. All right, so now I'm going to bring some reds up into here. Now we got all this green. We've got to have some warmth in there, so I'm going to bring some reds up into here. And this is cadmium red light with a touch of quinacridone coral. And then I'm going to do the same thing down in here. I want to see some reds come through that. So I'm again being very bold, and I'm scumbling to trying to create some texture right off the bat down in these areas, which is happening nicely. All right, so you can see what I'm doing. I'm trying to just get all of this in here, and while this is drying, I'm working here. While this is drying, I'm working here. And one thing that I do like to do is grab a little bit of clear water at this point, not too much, it needs to be wet, and then I'm going to flick that into these wet areas to add even further texture into it. You can see these little sparkly things kind of shape up in there, and they might get covered up, they might not, but once again we're trying to create a lot of texture right off the bat. That's what we're trying to do. You can see what I'm doing now is I'm leaving the tops of some of these bushes that are coming down along the side, allowing them to cut a little bit of yellow maples down into here. And I don't want this to be pure white, but it's going to be light. So what I'm doing now is just creating this texture and the feeling of these lights that are back up in here. And I'll come through and work on that more later. I think I'll go up and get some of these yellow trees in here as we work our way up. We'll stay with kind of a light back up in there, but we'll take it right up into the sky. Right to this edge. This is a clean hard edge there, so I'll just get these aspens, bring some of these yellows up higher. As I start to crawl out from underneath this rock and come out into the sunlight, I'm going to leave some sparkly areas around those rocks, and of course we can always come back in and darken things up, but it's very hard to get the lights back again once we've taken them out. So that's what we have to be careful about as we work down into these rocks now. But let's just soften some of these edges right now, and then I'll come in and define some of these shapes. And see how quickly we move into these big, large areas. And you say, well, God, it's just a big pile of color and stuff. Yeah, but it's in the right spot. And as I work it and come along through here, it's gonna come out just right where I want it to be. I'm not looking at things, I'm looking at areas of light and dark, trying to get those in there. See how I'm creating my grays by using blue, red, and yellow. Remember, on this form shadow side, we've got to have some reflected light. So I'm creating that by allowing these pigment to mingle a little bit. Okay. We'll need to get these a lot darker than what we're seeing them here eventually. But right now I want to get some color into these areas that I've created with my pencil prior to this. Get some darks in there, and then I can see where these shapes come around. Right up in here we have a very dark but very warm shadow. This is what we call a form shadow, or the area that's not receiving any direct sunlight, but what it is picking up is a reflected light off the water back up into it. You can see what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to show where the light's hitting across the tops of these rocks and just shape those as I go. I'm not trying to record every little thing, but I'm trying to just get myself to an area where I can find these edges and and make it look like those rocks are sparkling forward as they come out. And I think this come along okay. So I think I'll continue now to just work on the water and these rocks and kind of build it up as I go. This might be a little tedious, but it's got to be done. And so I'm going to leave a few little sparkles down in here where we see the sparkle in the water. I'll especially be careful where I put this, and I'm going to bring a little bit of blue into the water that's going to flow over the top, and then there's going to be a little cast shadow down here in this white part. So I'm going to go ahead and get that. So as I continue on here, I'm going to speed the camera up just a little bit through this next sequence so that you can see in a quicker fashion what I'm going to be doing on this painting. As you can see now, I'm just working on the lights and the dark areas. I've got to paint the dark areas to reveal the lights. And of course the light is where the sunlight is hitting as it bounces across the rocks. And of course we're in a backlighted situation here, so the light's coming from off in the distance through the trees. So we're seeing mostly the shadow side of the rocks. Now here I'm working on where the water flows across these rocks, and that's a very interesting part of the painting. In fact, it's the thing that really makes this water sparkle, is to be able to see these white areas down in here in contrast to the darker rocks. Now, these are the lightest and the middle value areas of the rocks. So I will begin to darken those up after I get these basic shapes into this area. And then I'll come back in and darken up the shadow side, being careful to leave the reflected light in some of those areas where it needs it. And so I'm just going to plow through this with the camera speeded up. Hopefully you'll still be able to see what I'm doing, but what I'm doing here in 5 minutes on the video is really about an hour's worth of painting. So don't think that this part of it goes really, really fast, because it actually doesn't. It's a kind of a slow process, and I don't want you to get bored, but be careful as we see what's going down here in these areas, that you're watching how we're building this up from light to dark. Like right down in this area, on this little part where the water comes over the falls here, I'm trying to indicate that and show the rock as it comes through or behind the water as it flows over. Watch how this develops. Then I'll develop each of the other rocks in this same fashion as I proceed across this painting. But again, this is about an hour's worth of painting in just 5 minutes on this video, and hopefully it'll show you enough that you can see the process that I use. In watching this, you think, wow, he paints really fast, but you know that I don't. This is a lengthy process. So just enjoy the music and watch the remainder of this for another few minutes. Okay, I'm back again now, and this whole area is dry, and I've got some of these trees sketched in up in here, and just some of the detail. I've kind of broken up these bushes into some detail, and I've got these rocks almost the way I want them down in here. So I'm going to let this go for a while and work up here on the top. Let's start with the big tree. I'm going to bring a little bit of sap green down into here. I'm going to also bring a little bit of quinacridone sienna over in this area. Some phthalo blue, which is very, very, very dark and very intense, as you can see what it does to this water as I stir that into it. I'm also going to bring some New Gamboge over here and a little bit of yellow ochre. Now I've got blue, red, yellow, and we know what that'll do. And some of this yellow mixed with the sap green makes kind of an earthy color. Now our light source is generally coming from this side, so I'm going to kind of start with some lighter just right up here at the peak of this tree now. Don't want it to be too distinct, but I want to break up these edges and make them kind of alive. Now I'm going to drop some additional color into that in just a minute. But let's go ahead and work some of this down into here. Let's grab some a little more yellow for this side. And this is clear at the top, so the shapes that I'm making, I'm going to have some trunk in here, but I don't want to get too carried away with it. At this point, I want to just get some color down where the foliage is going to be. It's pretty warm at the top. I'm going to just bring a little bit of reds into this now. This is with quinacridone sienna. Work my way over onto this side, and I'll come back over the top of this in a little bit and really shape these and give them some feel. So I'm going to come down here now, get some of this green in on these bigger this bigger foliage. And notice I'm coming across. I want there to appear to be foliage here in the front, not just hanging off either side of a branch. I'm leaving some room here so I can put those branches into it. But now let me bring some darks, just a few darks in along the bottoms here, more towards the right hand side and underneath where it might be a little bit darker, and let that pigment just mingle here and there, and come back to these other greens down in here where I want them. Now I'm going to go in a minute and put some foliage underneath the foliage that we see in the background underneath the shadow. I'll do that after this part dries. Let's get some more yellows into here. Grab some yellow ochre. So I have a variety now that's happening. I've got some darks, but not too many. We'll just stay with these lights and come back in over the top and rework those darks as we go. Okay. It's coming along nicely. Let's get some darker greens in here now. Another way to get some dark greens is to use your sap green, which looks like this, and grab a tiny bit of carbazole violet and see how that darkens up these greens quite a bit. Just a little bit of that carbazole. And then that makes kind of a dark brownish green as well for these areas. Now this might be as far as I go at this point. Now I'm going to identify a few branches coming off of the trunk, doing some negative painting right down in here. And I'll let those come up in the foreground. So we're painting the dark, but we're revealing the lights as we go. Okay, so these darks back here, I'm leaving the trunk. I want to see that. But I really want to see these branches just kind of work their way out from the side. And I'll be careful and cautious as we kind of shape these. We'll do plenty of work on those later, but for now, let's just get these going down into here. And now I'll shape the other side of these branches. Leaving a little bit of trunk. I want to see just a tiny bit of that. The same thing up here. I'm going to leave some trunk, but allow a few branches to break loose from. And these would be coming out from the underside. Okay. Come clear across the front there. Break that shape. And again, I'm going to leave a couple little branches up in here. Okay. Come back to these greens now and keep working those this way. Still leaving quite a bit of negative shapes down in here. Doesn't matter where they are or where they go. It won't be pure white when we get done with them. I'll put a tone in there, but I want to see definitely some of these branches work their way forward and find their way down into this little mass of foliage down in here. I want some lights coming through it, so I'm careful to leave that right now. Okay, now I'm going to work my way over. We have another tree over here and another one of these evergreens. I'll just put this and then just keep working. And we're going to see some positive branches come out through here. And I'll let these blend up into this one, so these two trees kind of merge, the small one and the big one behind. And then we'll bring some good warms into this area. And see how it's coming, looking pretty good. All right, down in here I have a little tangle of branches that I want to come through, so I'm going to carefully delineate those right now. That's an enjoyable part of the painting, when I get into all this kind of detail work down in here and start to shape these big, bold, dark masses that we have. But for you it may be a little boring. This last part of the painting might take several hours actually, which I can't record all of that. It would just be too long. But I'm going to let you see as much as I can of it as I kind of refine this area around in here from the back forward. And then ultimately I'll come down and finish up down in these in the foreground area and really finish that up a little bit. So I'm going to work right down in this area here right now and bring some of these greens up, shape some of these, and then start to refine the shape down in here just a little bit more so we can see some detail. Can you see how this right here, this aspen comes out in the foreground? It looks bigger than the rest, so we see that it's in front. Well, we don't see that right here on this one. We see some of these other shapes, but I'm going to come in here right now. I'm going to say, well, I want this big aspen to come down here right in front. Let's try to shape that in some way and bring this shape down and make that appear somewhat larger. Now it's going to have a trunk come up through it, but I'm not sure yet whether that's going to be a positive or a negative shape, but I'll just go ahead and sketch that in. And we're going to have some form to that, I know, at least. So this is going to come down through here and back into this area. And then this one is going to be back behind here. And it's going to come out into this area. And then we've got some others that will come out behind. But what I'm doing is I'm showing how these shapes overlap so that we can help, as we overlap these shapes, it helps the viewer go back in space. Okay, so now we take a look and you can see better how I've drawn these lines, indicating the shapes, or I'm going to do some negative painting back up here, here, and here. But I'm even going to have some branches coming up there, but I want this shape to overlap this shape, which overlaps this shape, which overlaps this shape, and then everything folds down into this area. So on top of all this that I've drawn in here, or that I've painted in here, look at all the variety of colors and shapes and textures and splattering. Now I'm going to start to refine those into some shapes that have edges. And these edges is what tells the story on what kind of shrubs these are. So I'm going to now start to refine some of these and work my way back. Now, right up in here, and here, and here, and here, I'm going to make this edge come out because I'm going to darken up this edge back in here. And to do that, I'm going to use a little bit of yellow and a little bit of green mixed together. And again, with this close, you're not going to be able to see my palette as much. But I'm using a little bit of yellow ochre and a little bit of sap green. And now I'm going to separate these shapes. And this will continue these greens from down in here that are going to work their way back up behind. So I'll come down to these edges that I've created with my pencil, and I'll be kind of hard-edged right in there. That way the viewer can tell that it's the outside edge and I'll bring this over as well. So this is the off in the distance. Now I'm going to bring some New Gamboge yellow, so stronger yellow, up in here, and then let that melt together with what's down below by pulling that up into it. And now we're starting to see a form that's behind, but it makes this one stand out. Okay, so that's working nicely, just the way we wanted it to. I'm going to come down in here, leave a little bit of these showing, but again, we want to push these branches back. So I'm going to come down now and work my way across here with a little bit darker yellow green. This is going to come down and join these cooler greens here underneath, and I'm going to form some edges and create some detail. Leave a few little holes, and I'm going to come up and refine some shapes right on the edge of this, and at the same time I'm going to leave some little branches sticking out, because these are in front. This is in front of that, so we can see it start to come out towards us. And So I'll leave some detail back in here. And come down in this area. And then I'm going to just let some of these darker darks flow gradually from this. It's still wet, so I can have this nice flow of pigment come down. And we just see these bushes start to form in this lovely, lovely fashion. Now, once again, in order to speed up the process a little bit, I think you'll still be able to see each step as I progress through this painting now. But I'll speed up the camera and watch carefully as I form the hard edges first, and then let the outside edge, usually the side towards the light, as I go back in space, then I soften that with clear water, oftentimes mingling different shades or values and colors into the mix as I go to create that variety. So as you watch this progress now, try to keep in mind how I'm creating these finer edges using the negative painting process. So now I'm going to, again, I'll finish some things up here and work my way down forward. Touch a little bit of red into that and make it gray. And I'm going to come way off here in this background, pull some blue, and just kind of give the indication that there's some trees way back here, way back off. And by putting this into this light blue back here, it it really pushes it back because of aerial perspective. Things that far off in the distance aren't going to show off very much. And they're going to just be kind of veiled by the haze that's back there in the air. So let's bring these back into that range and just push some of these back. I'll leave a few back in here even, so you get that feeling that things are going off in the distance, and then I'll soften some of those edges. Okay, now that's good for now. Now right up in here, I would like to bring a little bit of blue onto these branches that come out, and some reds. Now the reds are going to look more like what the trunk of the tree would be, and we'll still see it. We'll still see these branches, but they'll be subdued slightly by this blue that we're going to put in here. And we'll leave a few sparkles showing through, but we'll keep it fairly light. And then I want to bring some reds where the trunk comes down and kind of introduce what might feel like the trunk and the colors associated with that, and just warm that up slightly. And we'll still see it. We still see everything there, just like we did before. But now we're just going to bring some of these branches back in space just a little bit. And we sense the trunk's back in there, but it's not pure white like it was. So that's how we kind of push some of this back up underneath. When that's dry, I'll darken up some of the shadows under there as well. So now I'm going to come over here and do the same thing on some of these aspen trees. Back down in this area. Just, once again, just doing this to taste. I feel like I need a little something here, a little something there. Of course, it's easy to overdo, which I probably always do, but it's part of that process. Move this down here while I work in this area. Darken up these greens up in here. And I'm going to get a much darker green. Touch a little yellow into it. Okay. I'm going to bring these darks down in here. And start to shape some of these weeds that come out along here in the foreground. They're up close, so we want them to be big, and we also want to see a little more detail in them. So I'm going to be pretty bold now as I work these shapes. The darks that I'm going to need down in here to shape this, as well as the lights of these weeds as they come out and kind of crisscross over each other. We have some come in front and some go behind. I'm going to mix in some reds with that as we go. I'm going to create some sparkly lights and darks that we would see up close, that we wouldn't see back in here, but we would see these kinds of things up close. So, okay, I'm leaving some of these that come off at an angle and that kind of cross this way. That's going to look a little more natural, like what we would see. They're not all sticking straight up. We have some that are moving forward and down, and we want to get that into the mix as well. Variety of directions, a variety of shapes. And we'll come back and add some more to this after this dries. Some more detail and some more of these shapes that move in and out and away from each other. Now I'll soften some of these edges. Okay, so now I'm going to work down in the water a little bit and try to find some of these rocks that come down off the side and just darken up some of the edges using kind of a gray in here. I want to show the light hitting off of the top of these rocks, and so I can show the light filtering across the front, but I still want to get some shapes of these rocks in there, and so I'm going to just kind of continue to work on these, darken them up. Now they got to be at least as dark as what's back up in here in some of these shadow areas, and I may have to darken up some of the shadows that I already have and make some newer, darker ones as well as I go across here. And I'm looking for places where there's a strong shadow. That would be on the underside of a couple of these rocks here. So this area that looked plenty dark before, as we darken the rest of this up, we see that it needs to be darker to really stay in the right range. So that's what I'm working on right now, is bringing some of these darks into the foreground. And making them warm enough as well. Now I'm feeling like there's just a little bit too much of these pokey things coming up. I'm going to bring up an old stag right through here. I think make it come up a little bit higher even than that. I don't know. Let's give it a try and see what we have here. And I think possibly one more right in here. Bring this one up. Bring some branches off and across. Darken up one side of that just a little bit. Letting the pigment run. And I think I'm going to, let's see, I think I'm going to leave that one where it is, but I think I'm going to raise this one up a tiny bit and leave just a couple more of these coming through here. I'm going to bring a few branches up through these aspens. It'll be more of a positive shape. A few little branches here and there. And let's come up and do what we said we'd do and help this tree out up at the top. I'm gonna bring this clear up to here. Create some interesting branches and come off of here. I'm going to keep it light on this side, but I'm going to bring some darks across and carry it further out. And then continue to bring these darks down in here. Of course, the darker darks that we use up here will pull this tree forward a lot more than it is right now. It'll also give it some dimension in terms of roundness and shape to it by having some lights and some darks. I'm going to darken up this other tree behind it. This is kind of blending in with everything now, so I'll just put a little bit in pigment into this one behind it. I think I'm going to bring this one up right across that. Right across this peak, so it doesn't, we can tell that it's actually in front of that one. There, I think that's a little better. But I think I'm going to bring this tree up just a little bit now that we're at this point. And make sure that this tree comes forward into these darks in here. and then just increase the size of it a little bit, slightly larger. Again, it's not a thing that we need there so much as it is just a value shape. And I'll bring some of these darks that we see up here down and do a little negative painting on it right on the top of these weeds that are sticking up in there. So I'm darkening this up as we approach the bottom. Of course, we don't want to go on forever with this stuff, but that's always the problem. Is, you know, when do I stop? How do I complete this thing and not keep going with it? And I don't know how to answer that other than have somebody stand nearby and slap your hand, which I could use a lot of times. Some of my students have offered to do that. I haven't taken them up on it yet, but all right. Okay, we're there. I think anything else I do now is just kind of just messing around. It won't help it, maybe not hurt it, but it won't help much. So let's call it quits. Let's put a mat on it and see where we are. But I'll let it sit here for a week or so, and I'll take a look at it now and again. I'll always find an area that needs some attention. Well, here I am with the finished painting here behind me, all framed up and ready to go. I hope you like it, and I hope you enjoyed your experience watching me paint it today. In your own paintings, you're going to do things differently maybe than I do, but with transparent watercolors, there's a variety of styles that people can use. The style I use is what I'm used to over the last 40 years of painting. But I appreciate you watching me, and I hope some of these things and some of these techniques will help you in your own paintings. Thanks again for joining me. I'm Roland Lee.